Well, welcome. We'll start our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thanks for helping out with the dog.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Give me a moment to get my glasses on here. No emergency modifications as far as I have heard. I'll need a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
I'll move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, none opposed. Okay, obviously, we just have one item on our agenda, which is to discuss that the Historic Preservation Committee has recommended to landmark the entire Chaparral District office property. And so we wanted to discuss what our next steps were. We have the option of, not responding to anything, and it goes before the city council, and the city council votes on their recommendation. What I would like to discuss is the option we have to formally object to the HBC recommendation. Oh, okay.
Well,
So
they
that will
absolutely
be-
will do public comments.
Yeah.
If your comment is
Yeah.
on this very item, then
No,
it's not. Okay, very good.
Okay, sorry, Bob, I missed that, moving on to, but that'll be part of our discussion later. I do want to do my public comment here for Bob Daddy, sorry.
School Board, I want to thank you for your service. I've been meeting with council people, other people in a number of residents. And what I want to bring up tonight is Senate Bill 1413. This thing was done the 27th of September last year. It's kind of a misnomer. It's the Leno School District Employee Housing. That's what it actually is. It's actually known as the Teacher Housing Bill of 2016, which is totally incorrect. It's for employees of the district, all employees of the district. So what I want to do is I just want to read a short bit here, and I want you to consider something, and I'll ask you to ask a question at the end of this. The bill would authorize a school district to establish and implement programs as provided that address the housing needs of teachers and school district employees who face challenges in securing affordable housing. I've discussed this with some of your members on this board. Students in the community at large are benefited by teachers living in the community in which they practice their profession. It ensures stability, community involvement, stronger ties between teachers, their students, and families. By creating affordable housing options for teachers near or on school sites, it also reduces vehicle miles traveled, time away from teachers' home, and reducing or eliminating commute time. It's highlighted as the Teacher Housing Act of 2016. That's part 14 of this. The purpose of this part is to facilitate the acquisition, construction, rehabilitation, and preservation of affordable rental housing for teachers, school district employees, to allow teachers or school district employees to access and maintain housing stability. Teacher or school district employee means any person employed by the Unified School District, and I can go into the subchapters, into the preteens, and we're not going to do that. A school district may establish and implement programs that address the housing needs of teachers and school district employees who face challenges in securing affordable housing. The extent feasible, the school district may establish and implement programs along other things that do the following: leverage federal, state, local, public, private, nonprofit programs and fiscal resources available to housing developers. Promote public and private partnerships. Foster innovative financing opportunities. The part specifically creates a state policy supporting housing for teachers and school district employees as described in section 4.2, I'll drop this off, of the Internal Revenue Service Code, and further permits school districts and developers in receipt of local or state funds or tax credits designated for affordable rental housing to district occupancy to teachers. And I'm going to go back and say that I got beeped. Designated for affordable rental housing to restrict occupancy to teachers and school districts' employees on land owned by school districts, so long as that housing does not violate other applicable laws, which I know you never will. So I've read that for a purpose, and I'm gonna give this to Kathy, so you folks can see what I read it for a purpose. Maybe you folks would be so kind and knowledgeable to ask the city council and the HPC how landmarking enhances the value in coordination with this article, where this facility, that over there, could be used for teacher and school district employee housing. I would like to have you folks ask someone over there, because I heard a comment that this would enhance the value. And I have done a lot of studying, and if you've gotten emails from me at 3:30 in the morning, they're a little late, because I'm reading Bill Miley's coming in from 2:30. And I did ask Mr. Miley to show up tonight. I don't know where he is, but hopefully he'll show up. So you have an opportunity to do some developing on this thing. There's multi-phase ways to do this. There's a number of things you can do. I'm not gonna say I'm against landmarking, because I haven't heard specifically how it enhances the value. I'm very, very interested. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much for your service. And should you get into the arena, and should you ever get an opportunity to put in school district employee housing, I'll certainly do everything I can to support you. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I guess nobody wanted to say anything or ask him a question. He left. So I think that actually is about tonight's topic, which is something, we can add to the discussion if we'd like.
I can grab him.
No, I don't have a question for him.
Oh, I thought you said you had a question.
No, I thought he said you can ask me a question afterwards or
No,
something.
he wanted us to ask that question.
Oh, okay.
after.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Misunderstood that. Okay. So what I was saying beforehand, which I got out of order, is we do have the option to formally object, to let the city council know that we object to the HPC recommendation. And I actually just had a question for you. The first time it went through HPC and then it went to the city, the actual city staff actually recommended something different.
Correct.
But what they approved this time was the same thing that they had approved the first time?
Well, there's confusion there. The HPC stated in their motion to approve the resolution to approve it as written, which was the same thing that they approved previously. However, the context to that statement was that they were thinking that as written would actually designate the entire property. And so I've had communication with the assistant city manager, and he said that even though the HPC stated to approve the resolution as written, that really their intent was to landmark the entire property. And so that was what was going to be going forward in some modified version to the council.
Okay. And that includes the skate park?
That's where there's ambiguity. They said the entire property. Again, it's not currently written in the resolution, so I don't know if that would include the skate park.
Do you know if they were gonna vote again to clarify what they were voting on?
The indication I have from city staff is there will not be another vote by HPC unless council were to send it back to them for
So
clarification.
there was a vote to accept it as written, and then now it's being rewritten.
No, as written, it says for the whole property.
No, it doesn't. It's
Oh.
not currently written as whole property.
Oh.
It's written as the
Oh, okay.
buildings that were under study for the.
But now they're going to
Right.
rewrite it after the vote.
Correct. That's what assistant city manager said, because the intent was vocalized during the vote that, again, it was confusing because they did say that they wanted it to be approved as written, but again, the context to that statement was that they were under the impression that it was actually written in such a way as to include the entire property.
So in the correspondence that I saw, I didn't see any indication that we would see the new recommendation at any particular time certain. Did you get anything?
That's correct.
Anything, nothing?
No.
Okay.
So is it strange for us to, no, we could still make an appeal or to formally object to the recommendation if we so choose.
Well, I think we should certainly consider objecting to something that we don't even know what is.
Well, I also think my thoughts are, there was a lot in the original report from the woman in, wherever she's
Provenience
from,
group.
about insufficient integrity of design, and we all have been through multiple conversations where we talk about the changed roofs, the changed windows, the change, those sort of things. Obviously, when the skate park was put in, it wasn't, there wasn't thoughts that the site was worth landmarking, and when the overlay was put on, there wasn't thoughts about it being a historic landmark at that point. So, my hope is that we can come to, what I am feeling is that there are certain aspects of this property, like for me, the Chaparral Auditorium, which are valuable in terms of integrity or in terms of what the property might originally have held. And it's a good-looking piece. But this whole wing doesn't really match downtown, and the superintendent's wing is really bad. And then, of course, there's a gas station right between downtown and us. So my fear is that landmarking the whole place prevents a developer from actually making it better, from actually tying it more cohesive, making it more of downtown, making the space more accessible for the community. Right now, everyone just, walks by. If they're parking, they walk by to go down there. Now, I don't know that we'll find a developer to do that. I don't know that they would want to change anything, but I can probably guarantee that they would want to change something back here, for sure. And I'm afraid that the landmarking status would prevent the opportunity. So my objection to, what I would like to formally present to them is an objection stating those things, that we hope to postpone this or maybe change the recommendation and have a landmarking of the auditorium. I don't know how you guys feel about the auditorium, but I've heard from the community a lot about that. There are certainly lots of things we can discuss. And whether, we as a board write something, whether we have staff write something, well, those are the things we should discuss, I think.
I have some concerns on a couple of grounds, right? One, that everything that we've heard from the HPC so far has been very nebulous in terms of what is the actual effect of this designation. At one point, it was sort of said, it's not going to stop you from doing anything you want, and then at the same time, I hear you can't touch anything, including the land in there, so that anything we build near the buildings is now subject to a historical review. So what I'm hearing is very unclear as to what exactly is the practical effect of this, other than you can't do anything without the HPC's blessing. And that's the one distinctive thing that I've gotten. I don't understand, does that mean we can't touch anything? The fascia can't be touched, but we can modify behind it. I don't really know the specific limitations that this designation puts on us. So I don't buy that. I accept that the HBC's opinion is that this designation is, not burdensome, and someone else who thinks it might actually add to the value. I don't think that's an established fact by any means. And I think that any kind of bureaucracy or bureaucratic burden that you put on a property, despite the fact that developers are used to it, the more you put on it, the more difficult the project becomes. That seems common sense to me. And then I kind of go back to something that Matt Summers actually said at the HPC meeting, in the context of imposing this status on an unwilling owner, right? It was observed that this has never been done before in the city of Ojai. And Matt, in so many words, said that while you can be somewhat free with the justifications for imposing this designation on your own property, i.e. City Hall, one might expect that you would look for a much more solid basis of justification to impose this on an unwilling owner, particularly one that's already considering development, where this might complicate that fact. And I think, in fact, that Matt is accurate. I think that before you impose something on someone who doesn't want it, you need a justification more than it's old and we like it. And a lot of what I read in that report is it's old and we have fond memories of it. But nostalgia is not historical relevance and significance. Nostalgia is something else entirely. So I think part of the objection is that what's being forced on us is sufficiently non-specific that it is an undue burden and it is inappropriate because nobody knows what it means. Now, if we were to go back, for instance, there was a lot of discussion about the non-arches along here, right? And how they match the real arches in the arcade. So look and feel is not the same thing as historical significance. Compatibility with other architecture in the downtown area is not the same thing as historical significance. And to the extent that that recommendation is based on those things, I think it's an overreach. Just as I do landmarking all of the land around the buildings in an attempt to control development nearby, I consider that to be a significant overreach. I think that if we can decide and get clear what it is that we're trying to protect, there are ways to get there. For instance, if we are being told that the city wants a face along the avenue that is compatible with the arcade, that's doable. That can be done. I mean, I would expect anything that looks somewhat vaguely Spanish anyway, because it's downtown Ojai. I don't expect a big black granite tower.
Well, and there's codes that will enforce that too.
Well, and there's the planning commission and a whole bunch of other stuff, right? So there's a lot of stops along the way for architectural compatibility, for, you know, making it conducive, because I also like the idea of pulling the arcade down further and expanding the commercial area to make it much more viable, because I've seen that the traffic doesn't make it past the arcade very well either. East End is going up now, not because of that, but you know, I've seen the turnover on that sort of less traveled end, and I think there's a lot of things that can be done with the facing part of this property to pull that commercial district down and make this much more viable. But I think, you know, if we're limited because people love the setback is not historical. The trees are dead and dying, they're not historical. So it might mean that that setback is smaller, but there's still a compatible arcade. So I think my objection is that this is being done with a very broad brush, very quickly and very non-specifically. And I think that when you're doing this to somebody who doesn't want it, A, you need to have a very compelling reason, not just a nice reason. B, you need to be very specific about what you're imposing on folks. And C, you should have exhausted other alternative approaches before you force this on us. So for instance, if the city wanted to talk to us and come to some agreement about some of the design elements that we would expect or require in a proposal, I think that's a conversation, and that's a conversation I think we've said previously that we're willing to have. But I don't think by doing a historical designation and forcing that conversation to run through the HPC every time, I don't really think that's helping us or anybody else, frankly. I think we could end up with an elephant designed by committee, which isn't necessarily going to be what anybody wants. So I would support an objection based on those three things.
We're going in order.
We don't have to. If somebody feels the need to speak out. I didn't hear them.
I'm happy to say a few words. Through this process, it's caused me to do a lot of thinking. One, what is historic? What do we have here? What is the past? What is the future? What's the best way to deliver the needs of education to the students of the Ojai Valley? In terms of,
Sorry.
it's kind of like background music. I probably need it to be more entertaining.
It's quiet here tonight.
That'll work. You know, I think a great model of how to preserve the old with the new was the Libby Bowl. project, where the old Libby Bowl was designed by the same architect who designed this property. The entire thing was torn down by the city, and a new Libby Bowl now stands that is actually commercially viable, and people go there almost every weekend and enjoy it and love it, and it works great. It harkens to the old, but it's the future. I think that's a beautiful way for Ojai to move forward. I don't think that landmarking this building would accomplish that kind of future for the city of Ojai. I think that rather it gets us stuck in a place that will be very hard to get out of. I have so many thoughts, but one was at the HPC meeting, there was a significant amount of discussion about how past school boards had not maintained the building very well. And the HPC knows the history of the building quite well, and I was really quite surprised that no one on the HPC made clear that most of the reason that the building is not in great shape was because of a massive earthquake that toppled the tower and ruined the roofs and really kind of destroyed the entire building. And it's only because of school boards in the past that the building's even standing today. I think that the easiest thing for a school board of the past to do would have been to just finish what the earthquake had started and rebuild. But instead, they wanted to preserve what was here, and they wanted to preserve the memories, and they did. And now we still have the buildings.
I didn't realize it was an earthquake. I had known that the tower had toppled, but I didn't know.
Yeah. The other concern I had about the discussion at the HPC was they wanted to preserve the preschool building, which is mid-century modern, and they wanted to preserve this building, which is a mission revival kind of theme, and they wanted veto power on anything else that's put on the property so that it will match what's already here. I can't imagine for the life of me how you build something that's compatible with mid-century modern steel and glass, mission revival, and tie them all together. It's unimaginable to me. I don't know what a developer could do to do that.
For me, if you, and if you guys disagree, let me know. But I think, I agree with a lot of that stuff, but I don't know that it goes towards the objection, or maybe it does.
Well, I think it goes towards the objection because of the lack of clarity.
Okay.
And I object in some ways to the foundation of why the decision was made, because there was what I believe a lot of misinformation given at the meeting. I think that Andy very clearly stated a whole lot of points in the report that were misrepresentations, and they were totally ignored by the commission. I think that there are some factual things that are incompatible that were just kind of lumped together in the whole sentiment of we want to approve it. I think that there is a huge legal issue with the state with respect to the overlay, because the housing overlay, as I understand it, was done for the city to comply with certain housing codes of the state. And by landmarking, without already having additional overlay property, it seems to me that that would be a violation of state law. And then I think that there are the economic reasons. I think that the HPC overtly stated that as Mr. Daddy was talking about, that there would be an enhancement in value. And if that's true, that would be fantastic, but based on everything that I've heard from any developer and anyone I know who's not either on the city council or the HPC, I've been told that it would probably make it more expensive for us to do anything with the property and would decrease our ability to raise funds. And my thinking is that if the city really wants to do that, I think the city should compensate the school district for whatever lost revenues there are as a result. I don't think that anything else would be just. I think it would negatively impact all of the voters of the valley, basically taking money away from the schools. And it seems that that would be essentially an unjust taking, which I believe would be illegal and I think would be a strong basis for an objection. So those are the thoughts at
And
the top of
obviously,
my head.
we can continue to, it's not like, that's it, you've had your say, we won't be speaking to you again.
Well,
I
I've
just thought
spoken a
initial
lot.
thoughts from everybody.
I've spoken a lot.
And then after, Bill, after I hear initially from everyone, we'll get to your thing before we start just more discussion. Kevin?
Well, I think there are lots of issues interplaying, and I guess, you know, on the big question or the broad question of appeal, something I'm not yet clear on is, you know, the appeal is to the city council, yet the city council itself also just needs to approve the HPC recommendation. So I'm wondering what's the difference between showing up to the city council on the date and time in question and saying we object to this versus a formal appeal, and how does the timing work? Does the appeal happen after the city council acts and then we appeal? I guess those are just sort of discrete questions. You want to answer those?
Sure. So I did speak again with Assistant City Manager on that question because I initially reached out to the Building and Planning Department, and they told us that was a $960 fee to appeal. But there was confusion about, again, as you state, the need to appeal when it's going to the City Council anyway. Assistant City Manager explained that they didn't want us using the term appeal, that the actual code section refers to it as...
And I apologize, because I know you wrote us some emails about it,
That's
but
fine, yeah.
it's...
No, so it's what we're doing is formally objecting to the recommendation as opposed to appealing a decision that would be coming from HPC. So the term that they're using is objecting. They said either way it's going to the City Council. The difference, though, between filing a formal objection and simply allowing it to continue on to the City Council is the difference of it being an item that would necessitate a public hearing. So by us requesting, or by us filing an objection, it would allow us the opportunity for a public hearing and for theoretically additional opportunity for this board to communicate with City Council. If we do not file the objection right now, the hearing date for the item is on the November
14th,
11th.
11th?
somewhere around there, 11th, 12th. Do you guys know 14th? Something in there.
Tuesday.
Second Tuesday of the month, November.
Second,
The
14th.
first
Yeah.
is on-
7th or 14th?
14.
14th, thank you, that sounds right. November 14th is currently a date scheduled for the item. We have until November 11th to actually file our objection, so if we do file the objection, then that would take it off their agenda for the 14th, because they're required to actually go through public notice, or public hearing notice requirements as well. But the real difference is, the way I understood it, that if we don't file the objection, that would likely appear in their consent calendar, and would not be something that would actually be properly agendized for a public hearing.
Other than if they decided to put it for public hearing, right?
They can just choose that?
I would think, just like we could. We could say this is an issue of public importance and we know people are interested, and so we're gonna agendize it as something for...
I think it could go on the non-consent.
I
Anyway,
assume that's likely correct. The guidance that the assistant city manager provided was, if we desire to engage the council in a conversation on the topic, the most effective means would be through filing a formal objection.
so the broader things that I have in my mind are things like, certainly the breadth of landmarking the entire property just seems, sort of sloppy, I guess, for lack of a better word. It feels perfunctory somehow, like, we're just gonna, like if it were a board game, we're just gonna occupy this whole thing and put our stamp on it. But beyond that, I feel like it is important for us to recognize that I think that we will fight an uphill battle on the discrete question of landmarking. Not, there's some absurdity to landmarking a gas pump, and it's absurd to landmark a skate park that was built, however many handful of years ago. But I think that if this were a battle of the people in Ojai and surrounding Ojai that make up our constituents, that there's a good chance that overall people would say, we like preservation and we don't want to change things really radically like this property. And I think that kind of reality is something that we may have to just make part of our worldview. I don't know, I think if we were to, I just don't know, but I do know that it's very easy for people who don't have an immediate consequence, and the consequences to the landmarking of this property are really abstract in the negative, and they're very easy to understand in the positive. What's the positive? Hey, we all kind of think Ojai is growing really kind of quickly, and there's a lot happening, and there's a lot of changes that we don't like. And I notice that when I drive through the center of town, it takes me twice as long as it did 5 years ago. And so somebody's out there looking out for the folks and wants to make sure that the school district doesn't turn it into something crazy. That sounds good. That sounds reasonable, right? So I like Jane, you said, the auditorium, reasonable people could think that could be a landmarked building or a part of it. So then you get into the question of negotiating possibly over the degree of the landmarking. I don't know enough about landmarking to know to what degree it can be undone if some great idea comes in, so I guess where I'm coming from is I don't take for granted that landmarking is a reasonable landmarking is a power grab that I find offensive. I get that there are people who have an interest in that, and it doesn't strike me as completely outrageous. But it seems like it's overbroad at this point. I don't know what impact, I've said it before, I had hoped that this process could happen after we saw some proposals, because it just seems so much simpler that way. But the truth of the matter is, we shouldn't kid ourselves. Anyone looking at this thing, any potential developer is sophisticated enough to be watching all this stuff going on. And the mere fact that the HPC hadn't landmarked it, if the landmarking was, like the sword of Damocles hanging in the air, they would have taken that into account anyway. So, we can't undo it. It's out there. It's going to be part of however we deal with this property. I have other questions like, Bob Daddy brings up 1413, the Senate bill, the employee housing. If we were to use this for employee housing, does that statute say anything about the impact of landmarking, or is that kind of a separate track where that law allows us to develop it for housing irrespective of local ordinances? I have no idea. I think it's an interesting question to the extent to which the city is calling this an overlay for the housing element, but apparently the landmarking would be inconsistent with that. Which, by the way, maybe this should never be housing. I mean, maybe that's good, I don't know. But there's a lot of moving parts. I guess my first thought would be, we certainly should have a public discussion of this at the city council. And we should certainly make these issues known. I certainly think that the breadth of deciding to landmark an entire acreage against the, if not against the wishes of the owners, I don't consider myself an owner of this, honestly. I think the owners are really everybody. So I don't know what the owners actually think about it, but I do know that certainly the owners, everybody didn't come forward and say, please landmark our property. It's sort of unprecedented. So we know that for sure. So I'd look for something more clear from HPC in terms of what, something more limited. I still look forward to hearing from developers about what things are possible for those like Bill, who's here now, about who are advocates of public housing. I wonder how that all plays into this legally. So as always, I leave you with lots of questions and few answers.
Can I just quickly, Andy, ask you about that bill? I thought it was strictly for affordable housing. Is it not strictly for affordable housing? I mean, for the
14,
teachers?
13?
Yeah.
I don't know much about 1413. I need to look into it.
Okay.
I know that prior to 1413, the feedback I'd received from other districts, specifically LA Unified, there was a pretty extensive article. There's one other district that had attempted to have affordable housing on former district property that they developed. That the issue was often that their teachers, while certainly underpaid relative to their time and effort and skill set, did not meet the thresholds for the income levels for affordable housing, and so
For the funding from the state. And the
right
federal
for the
level.
legal definition of
That's because Bob was
afford-
talking a lot about that. We're gonna get money from the outside, but I was thinking, I don't think
I don't
so.
think it's happened,
We
yeah.
pay
So
our-
I need to again. I haven't read on 1413 much, so I need to determine whether or not that requires the same standard for affordable housing.
I'm gonna make one comment too. I said something that may be misconstrued. When I say I think everyone owns this, I think board members come and go, and I think this has been here a very long time. We've talked about legacy board members and what they did and didn't do. I do agree, and I've heard it several times, I think certainly from Michael, and I've also heard it from Shelley, everybody here. We do have a fiduciary obligation to a class of people in our community, and they are the students. And I think everything we do as a board always has to be oriented towards what we think is best for the students in Ojai. But of course, it doesn't necessarily have to be a temporal, immediate thing. We don't have to always say what's best for the current students in Ojai, but we certainly want to say whatever we're doing, we think is in the best interest of future students now, the students who will come in the future. That's our job. That's what we do. That's what we're hired to do. To the extent we come into conflict with other public officials who have different constituencies, well, that's fine. But we have a constituency that we're obligated to protect.
And again, just to clarify, one of the things you said you didn't mind the landmarking if it was more specific or something.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that I think that this is a natural thing that goes on. I mean, it doesn't strike me as like dissonant music. I get it. I get the desire. I think reasonable people could want to landmark parts of this property, but it does seem, look, it's absurd to landmark a skate park. I mean, what possible justification could there be for that? And it also dilutes and it reduces the power of the landmarking altogether, right? It just doesn't look well thought out. It's like, why would you include a skate park? Just looks sloppy, like I said.
So I will do my best to do justice to the HBC. I believe that they would say the skate park is a I want to make sure I use the right term. Do you remember, Bill? A non-contributing.
Non-contributing.
Yeah, non-contributing. So they would not say that the skate park itself was historically significant, but by designating the entire property The non-contributing parts, you theoretically could make a change to. However, any change or modification would have to, or would be required to be in agreement with, again, I think Payne's point's well taken as far as what point exactly of this property would it have to be in agreement with, but theoretically, in addition to the skate park, would have to be in agreement with the theme of this property, but the current skate park as it exists would be considered non-contributing, just like the gas pump or those other, buildings back there, so
How do you decide what's non-contributing and what?
that's where clarification would be certainly helpful.
So that the historical designation becomes almost like a planning sort of scenario where they're saying, you gotta hire Mark Whitman because he's the only guy that can make this look like an 1850s Adobe thing, even if it's brand new construction. That kind of thing. Like if it's gotta look like the rest of the parts that we think are historical, even though, as we said, some of them are not in the same architectural.
Well, and that report goes on and on about how there's insufficient integrity on the property. So I don't know, again, what part it does seem a little cherry-picked, so.
Right, so the designation of the entire property would be, if, let's say, affordable housing were to go out by where the current bus yard is, where it's currently just land, that development would have to be, and again, in agreement with, or, not in any way take away from the landmark buildings that are on this property.
So we're not building craftsman bungalows back there.
Which
Right.
is interesting, because you could also imagine go in the completely opposite way and saying, build something modern, and then your landmark looks all the more unique and specific and landmark. Like that's, like when you're walking in Philadelphia and you come across some old schoolhouse that was, maintained from the 1700s next to a skyscraper, and you go, wow, that's a landmark.
That actually is the requirement at the county level, because we have a building and we added on to it. The building had already been so compromised that they weren't landmarking it or anything, but
Yeah.
they said the addition has to be unattached and it cannot try to duplicate the building. It
Yeah, I
has
can
to
see
be
that.
obviously something that's later on, because you want to be able to see the original integrity of the building. So that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
I guess my concern with a lot of this is school boards do come and go, but they're democratically elected by the people who own the property. And city councils come and go, but they're democratically elected by the people of the city. What concerns me is that HPC is not elected, and they would essentially have veto power over the elected representatives of the school district. And that doesn't seem very democratic to me.
Well, I think you could make the point that since any project that's not, I think we think that if we were to use this for a school, something that was under the jurisdiction of the Division of the State Architect, right, DSA, that we could do anything the DSA approved, and we wouldn't have,
I've
but
talked
to the
to members
extent,
of the HPC who did not feel that way at all.
well,
Yeah.
okay, but my understanding is that certainly anything development-wise that would be a non-school use is gonna require the city council to approve, and that's.
And they should.
But that's precisely the body that they end up being the arbiters of what can be done on this property, notwithstanding the fact that they are a city body and we're the school body, but that's the
So-
system.
I need to go back to what you just said about, you've talked to HPC members who feel that if we do any modifications, if this is landmarked, and we do any modifications, it still goes through HPC?
That's what.
Because
Yeah.
that then would mean far more expense to do any maintenance on this
Oh,
property.
anything would cost a lot of
So
money.
my
Yeah.
understanding was that it would go straight to DSA if we were still using this as,
One
Educational
HPC
facility.
member who I met with expressed the same sentiment that Thane's saying, that she was very strongly in the impression that if the property is designated, then any alteration that we want to make in its current form with us as property owner would have to go to them. I've received assurances from our attorney that that's not a proper interpretation, and so I think that it's possible they just are mistaken on it, but our attorneys are very confident that as long as it remains for instructional purposes under our ownership, that our ability to do the exact sort of work that we've already done with replacing windows or doing any other work would not be under their jurisdiction, but would be still under the state's jurisdiction.
Okay, because those are two, there's a difference between we can't leverage our property to bring in revenue versus now it's gonna cost you twice as much to do fix the roofs or any renovations. So we're enforcing more issues.
I mean,
And so
to me,
where
it's
do we get-
taking money out of the classrooms and
It
out of teachers.
absolutely is, yeah. And back to your point, I forgot your name.
Klaus. I'm here on an exchange for Berlin.
So, when my kid is over at your house, I really do know who you are.
Dude.
Your point, Kevin, about you hear from people that the auditorium is integral, or the arches that aren't actually arches, because nobody actually looks to see that they're not actually arches. I've completely lost my point. Oh, but the same exact people that I've heard say those things also say, but use that property, because that's the property that you need to develop in order to bring in revenue. So there's this, honoring that many people in the valley want those historically marked or not changed. Those same people are also saying, but please use this property that's at your disposal to create revenue, because we don't want a parcel tax and we don't want, to pay in these other ways. We think you guys should do this. So I think that we aren't, by not appealing and by not really letting people understand the ramifications or understanding them ourselves of what the historic designation would mean, we're not doing justice to what they're telling us they want at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
We need to honor
I
that,
think it's
that
like NIMBY too. When people say I want solar, except for I don't want a giant solar thing near me. It's incompatible.
I want good cell service, but I don't want a tower.
Exactly, incompatible. Desires.
And I also agree with the extending the downtown area. Hip Vegan is going in over here, and they're changing the orientation of their entrance will be on Montgomery, and you'll be coming out and looking at our nice big long, what I very sympathetically think looks like a prison. It's a fortress. It's a block with ancient windows with boxed HVAC or air conditioning units sticking out. It's not a beautiful Montgomery. There's so much potential that we get stuck not being able to do anything with, is my understanding of what that
Well, and it is,
designation would
I
mean.
went to the meeting that Mr. Wyrick and Ms. Franzina had at the, about the
Right.
discussions. And it is, there are possibilities here that could be unattractive to people in the valley, right? More shops that, they can't afford to shop at, or,
Right.
A huge hotel, whatever, with more traffic. And then there are things that seem attractive, yoga studios and something that maybe the community might use more. But I think any one of those things could be limited by landmarking this early. And I think that's what you were talking about, Kevin. Give it the opportunity to talk about what are the possibilities on this property before we take away the ability to have opportunities. And, as one of the council people, Susan Francina said at that meeting, this property can't solve all the city's problems, right? She wanted to make sure that the discussion didn't get out of hand. This is 7 acres. What the discussion was about was what people might want to see there. And that gets into the, is it affordable housing? Is it, restaurants? So we don't know, we're not building it, but if we do know that if it's landmarked, there's gonna be limitations that might prevent. In my mind, that's the sad part, is that there might be something that's really great for Ojai here that won't be able to be built because of the restrictions of landmarking.
So
But-
another question that comes up for me is if we maintain the property pretty much as is and it's designated historic and we're still using it as an educational facility, and we decided to look into 1413 and some miracle windfall of money comes along that we can build affordable housing there, does that go only through DSA? Does that go through HPC? What are the constrictions?
Oh, no.
Nobody knows.
No, I need to look into, you're saying the situation where if we continue to operate the sections of this property that are
It's still an
current,
educational facility.
but then we were to do non-educational or non-instructional related building
Because
like
teachers
residential.
love to live where their kids are going to school,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. So that one is not something that I have an answer to, is understanding the extent to which if we retain the current structures as instructional, but then we're to add new structures that were non-instructional, I'll get information on that.
I'm gonna take a moment to have give Bill an opportunity to speak. Is now an okay time?
Sure. A little stiff on my back here. For the record, my name is Bill Miley. I live at 919 North Signal Street, and I've told you that I've lived here a long time. Could I have a few more minutes than 3 minutes?
As long as you're not going on for
No.
10, 15
No.
minutes.
As long as you're not going on for 3 minutes
light-
and 15
the light
seconds.
bothers Can you turn the light off, maybe?
Okay, Kathy, I'll
Okay.
watch this, thank you.
So the summary, this is my summary. I suggest that the manner and the process that the Historic Preservation Commission used the night they did this was less than adequate for a city commission in making this decision. As I see it, it did not meet the standards for commission functions as I know them, because I've attended a lot of commissions, and I don't think this one meets it. Now, I'd like to say that there's a possibility that there's a legal conflict here with the state law on Senate Bill 1413, because I saw this way back in February. And I want to read you this one paragraph, and I think there's an issue here that the designation infringes on your right to do what this bill says. This bill would authorize the school district to establish and implement programs as provided that address the housing needs of teachers and school district employees who face challenges in securing affordable housing. I think the designation infringes on state law. Okay. As I remember the meeting, which I attended, didn't watch it, there are many issues raised in opposition to the 4-member HPC commission. 2 of them were absent and 1 was vacant, it's not filled. And I think that's important. 4 out of 7. There were many things raised in opposition. And they ended up landmarking older buildings, the auditorium, and all the land. And most of all, these issues were never raised by members of the HPC or addressed by the 4-member commission. And I think they were very important. Superintendent Cantwell read 9 pages. I sent them a 3-page letter, an email that was distributed to them the day before, and I spoke my 3 minutes. And I think these issues were so significant, they were never mentioned, they were never addressed. I'm going to say most, because maybe 1 or 2 of them were. They were never answered, and they were nor did they dismiss him. Well, they did kind of dismiss a couple of yours. Like, I think you were selective in what you presented. Somebody said that. Okay. I've attended many commission meetings over the years, and most, if not all of them, are very transparent and complete. This was not. And I intend to say this to the city council. I'll give you two examples. My two issues that I presented in my 3 minutes and further detailed in my 3-page letter were these. Item criteria K in their list. It says something like the private property or the rights of private property owners may not be infringed by a historic designation on their property. That's what the criteria was, and I think that it probably also came from the state, but it's the city's criteria. And they responded, which they listed. And it said, since the school district is public and they're not private, this doesn't count. And I said in my letter, and I said in my speech, I think I'm one of the owners of the school district because I'm a taxpayer. And I'm certainly not public, I'm private. So I think this is an issue that you should deal with. They didn't talk about it, they didn't discuss it, they didn't deny it, they just ignored it. So I think it's an unsettled issue that needs a legal interpretation. And it's a major issue. It says, we can infringe on you guys because you're public, but not on her because she's private. And that really smacks of bad behavior. Okay. The second one has to do, I raised the issue of the fiduciary responsibility the school district, the trustees have for education, financial, social for their kids and their parents. And that the population outside the city is much larger than in the city. And you guys, the commission is taking an action on a property that is serving more people outside than inside. And that was never addressed. And I think it's really important too. In fact, it may even be a state law issue that they're infringing on your ability to serve people that are outside the city. Okay. Too bad they aren't taking a picture of me today. Okay, I already dealt with that. Okay, now there's a list. If you've seen the list of historic landmarking, you've seen this list, okay? Well, I think I said this. Prior to the designation of the school district, they had 22. Now they have 25. None of these have a legal responsibility by state law. And I think that's an issue too. There may be one, oh yeah, the Nordhoff Cemetery, I said that, I did say that. It's the only one that has a legal responsibility to care for people in this area. And that wasn't addressed either. And then, of course, the issue was you guys said, don't do it, and they said, we're going to do it. And that was been raised a bunch of times. The last thing I want to say is, a couple of you got this letter, but these are the issues I raised in the letter, which I couldn't raise because I only had 3 minutes. So I request your reconsideration of this effort to protect the outside structures of the main Chaparral building, da-da-da-da-da. In my opinion, one, without a viable school district, the town will start to die. You had 5,000 and now you have 2,700 or something like that. Two, the elected school trustees have a fiduciary responsibility. I already said that, and that's their world. Your commission's world is the historic structures within the city. And others you may nominate from your sites of merit. I encourage them to consider putting you on a site of merit for future consideration. And then I used the jigsaw puzzle. I said, the district's educational world fits like a jigsaw puzzle pieces into the larger puzzle, which is the city of Ojai and the surrounding unincorporated district boundaries. right now the school district's jigsaw puzzles are smaller than they have been in the past, kind of like that. 5,000, 2,500. The overall jigsaw puzzle, which makes up the school district boundaries centered by the city's 7,500, all the pieces are there, but they're starting to loosen up, potentially fracturing the viability of the city and larger community. An underperforming school district will have many known and unknown consequences. 6, the Chaparral property under consideration is just one part of a system which provides current and future educational benefits, not just for the citizens, but to the citizens living outside. I keep coming back to that. That was not addressed.
I'm
Yeah, I
gonna
think
stop
that
you
it's-
there,
Okay, go on.
and I'm gonna have us discuss some of those things, because there were a couple of things that,
Okay, then, last one was the private property issue, which I already told you about. So, I think that you deserve a different kind of hearing, which is more transparent and complete, and you get answers before the vote is taken. Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you.
Did you wanna finish, Shelley? I don't know if you've gotten a chance to.
No, I'll interject as I.
Okay, okay. It's interesting that both Bob and Bill have mentioned the, the school district in terms of the valley, and how, if we can grow the school district, it helps the valley. Obviously, when people look to move and purchase a home, they say, what are the schools like here? So I don't know that it's relevant to necessarily the HPC discussion, but certainly to our hopes for what we do on this property, which relates it to the HPC, right? Our hopes that we can get some kind of funding that would help us serve our current students, but if somebody suggests something like the housing, maybe we do, do we end up with 100 more students? What does that mean? I don't know.
Something that I've thought about while we've been talking, and Kevin's points about reasonable people can think maybe something should be designated historic, and Shelley talking about people have conflicted interests. And, I've heard a number of times from the city saying this is such an important thing. And it just makes me think, maybe there should be a ballot initiative, asking the people of the valley, should the school district decide the future of the property here, or should it be the city and the HPC, or who do the people of the valley think should make these decisions? They're the ones who are electing us.
Well, I would venture to guess that they would think the school district is, because a good majority of those don't get to vote the city council. So they have no representation. So, I think that based on who's in the city and who's outside of the city.
Yeah. Well, and with all the talk about school district or school boards coming and going and city councils coming and going, maybe the appropriate thing should be to put it in the hands of the voters of the valley.
I would actually consider that, except that I don't know what it is yet.
Well, it would
Right.
have to be defined, and
yeah.
I would hope that we would put more thought into that than has been put into the.
Okay.
The list, Bill, that you, the 25 sites, the library's not on there, is it? I can't remember. I'm just, as far as historical buildings, it seems like that would be, and I'm wondering perhaps why the city isn't looking at, they wouldn't force that designation on a different public body.
No, but the Twice Told bookstore.
Twice Sold Tales, which is privately owned by the Friends
Here
Group.
you can have them.
Oh, thanks.
I think another consideration is what's the objective here? Is it preservation, or is it city control over the property? Because from a preservation perspective, The school district has preserved all of the Roy Moore buildings in the valley. The only Roy Moore building in the valley that the school district doesn't own, I believe, was Libby Bowl, which was torn down. And so we've preserved them all. So if the objective is to preserve buildings that he was the architect for, leaving it in the hands of the school board is a pretty good bet.
Yeah, but that goes back again to something that I just keep going back to what Matt was talking about, because I wholeheartedly agree that before you impose something on someone against their will, there should be a compelling reason to do that, not just a we would prefer or nice to have, right? And so when I read the report and it basically says when you get to the accurate representations, as opposed to that we have tile roofs where we don't, most of what's here is in pretty crappy shape. There is very little left to preserve. So preserving remnants of a historical property isn't the same thing as preserving an historical property. So, and I actually caught that too, that there are numerous examples of that architecture that are in much better shape than what's here. And to me, that mitigates against there being a compelling interest to preserve what's here. Because one of the things that were the criteria is that, it's uncommon, it's unique. Well, if there are 12 examples of it throughout the district, it's not unique. And if it's only 20% original, it's not historical. It's a remnant. I don't want to be designating ruins as historical. And that's almost kind of where we are with this. Nevertheless, I agree with Kevin. There is some consistency and some desire in this city to preserve the history of the city. And I think that there has to be a way to bow to that, to accommodate that, without preserving stuff that really just isn't really worth preserving. My other piece is just really, again, it's just the vagueness of everything when we, landmark the whole property, and then there will be a review to see if it's compatible with the historical property. What does that mean? What are the factors that are going to go into that? I have no idea. I don't know what to tell a developer. I don't even know what to consider. We won't know until and unless it's in front of the HPC and
Which
they
is interesting,
articulate it
because
at
if
the
you talk
time.
about things that, the HPC might be different in 10
Well,
years,
could- yeah,
right?
it could be totally
Or 5
different
years.
people, right.
So then
And
if
so
they
they
don't,
can
if
make
they're,
it up
if
as
they
they
want
go.
preservation, then they should be more specific about what are they preserving, so that when they're gone, there's still somebody there protecting it.
Yeah, and I think, if you're gonna landmark land with the express purpose of controlling development on that land vis-a-vis the historical property, then you best be very specific about what it is that's gonna be needed there. I think it's really almost, I'll just say an inappropriate overreach to say that we're gonna bind up that land because it's near a historical structure, and we'll decide at some future date what you can do with it, but we're not gonna tell you. I'm sorry, I don't believe in legislative guessing games. I think that's totally inappropriate.
I think another interesting thought I've had lately is we're looking at redoing the library at Nordhoff. And I think we've realized that what a library has changed over the last 100 years. And a library really isn't about a building that you put books in anymore so much. What you do with a library is very different in today's world, and requires maybe more meeting rooms, smaller group rooms, more electronics, more multimedia. And what are the people of Ojai going to want in 100 years and 200 years? Are we, putting a millstone around their neck and keeping them from doing what needs to be done in 200 years
On this property?
on this property? And, what is a school in 200 years? Does it require the same things that it requires today? And are we just going to create museums? And is that what we want to do? Maybe we do. Maybe we want to be Solvang and create kind of a museum, place for tourists to come and see what it was like in Ojai 100 years ago or 200 years ago, and dress in costumes and whatever.
I'm not wearing a costume. I don't do costumes.
Come on, it's Halloween tomorrow. But
Just imagining. The school board exhibit. I second it.
What are we doing to the future? And what are we saying to kids who are studying architecture? That this is the best that we're ever going to do? Or we put the future in your hands? I think we're making a lot of statements, and I think we should be careful about what statements we're making to the students that we're teaching.
So, obviously, I think I've heard at least 4 of us say that a formal objection to the HPC recommendation is in line. What we say, I've taken some notes on what maybe we would say in that objection. I'm willing to write that, or we could have Andy write it, or we could,
So the way it works then is we send an official objection, and then that opens it at the city council meeting to an open hearing, is that?
To a public hearing,
To a
correct.
public hearing, okay.
So
is it important what we
they-
say, or is it
That's
just
kind of
important
what
that
I'm
we
wondering.
say we object?
So, again, what Assistant City Manager stated was, in fact, his recommendation was in essence that it would be fine to submit something similar to what has already been submitted. There is no form for this objection process because, again, it's unusual. In fact, he couldn't recall a time where that's happened. Appeals, they have an actual form for. The objection, it's just a matter of stating what we'd like to, we have to formally state that we'd like to object. And then we have the ability to have anything communicated to them in writing, otherwise it can be communicated in person at the meeting itself. So I don't believe that the actual objection itself has to have our entire, argument or position or thoughts. It can be something truncated, and the conversation could, have.
We could just have a link to the YouTube.
Do we ever get a formal, this is what designation means? This is, we've talked about how we believe we go through DSA, they believe we go through HPC. Is there clarification ever on that? Or we just wait until we decide to try and do something and then see?
Yeah, to my knowledge, our attorney has spoken to Matt Summers. Our attorney's recounting of that conversation was that they were on the same page with regard to the extent to which HPC's designation would impact us, so long as we continue to operate as an instructional facility. I don't want to personally represent what Matt said, though, so in my experience working with the city recently, it would be that they would not want to make a statement that would help give us clarification on a legal matter. I think that they'd prefer us to have our own legal counsel provide that, and that he would view his role to provide guidance to the council. So I don't envision the council, or I don't envision city staff presenting a formal clarifying statement to us as far as what they perceive the impact of the designation.
I've asked architects in town who regularly work with the city, what does historic designation mean? What does that, does it tie our hands? What does it mean? And nobody can give me, I've gotten no straight answers on that.
Well, I think it certainly makes sense for part of our objection to request a clear statement by somebody as to what the impact of this is. I mean, just if for no other reason than the constituents out there who want to weigh in, should be able to see, what does this all mean? You guys gonna start costing the school district thousands of dollars every time they want to replace a roof on the district property, or every time they want to, change out an HVAC or whatever? I don't have any idea what it means. And I would assume there's a legal opinion would be required, right? Somebody who says either, something that would be binding after the fact, that said, when we designated this was what we were voting on and agreeing to and understood this to mean.
So, but as we sit here now for the council meeting on the 14th, We don't specifically know in writing what the HPC approved. We don't specifically know what staff's recommendation is going to be to the council, because previously it was different than the recommendation by the HPC. So we know that the council isn't limited to a straight up or down on the recommendation. Staff can recommend modifications, and I would presume that council could impose additional modifications by vote that night. So I don't exactly know what it is that's out there. I presume staff's recommendation will be published, along with the regular agenda, which is, 10 days, I think, in advance. So we'll have at least 10 days' notice of what the recommendation by staff is to the council, which really is the only thing that matters, right? I mean, the HPC can say what they want. Ultimately, it's staff's recommendation to council that we need to discuss. So
as far as noticing, the public notice would have to be 10 days in advance, but typically the city doesn't provide their reports 10 days in advance of their meeting.
to just a notice that they'll discuss it.
Exactly. The public notice would be in the OVN and would be provided to us as property owner.
But
But
as
we
the
would not
impacted party,
actually,
would we not be given something more notice than the general public who's not impacted at all?
I've made that request to Steve in the past and he said no, that we only receive what the public receives at the same time they receive it.
See, to me, that's an ambush, and I would object based on that ground solely, besides all the other stuff. I think, if this is that important, it's important to do it right. Not to come through with a vaguely worded thing that's just a catch-all because it's a sloppy conversation. And I watched the meeting where it happened, and I think that is an accurate characterization. It got very complex, and the HPC said, "Oh, to hell with it, just do the whole thing." I don't think that's good staff work.
Not 10.
Well, the public notice requirements are 10. As far as when they typically release the agenda materials, typically it's sometime between Wednesday or Friday preceding the actual day of the meeting. But the public notice where they actually are, again, in the OBN, taking out an advertisement as well as giving us a formal written notice that the item will appear at a future meeting is the 10 days.
The details come out fine.
Right.
So
Right.
this is, for me, it goes back to the meeting we had with the city, which, William, I'm sorry you weren't there. I thought it was a great meeting.
I watched it.
And for me, part of the formal objection is to say, we're having these issues with the HPC, and we're hoping that the council, as a different body, will take the opportunity to help us be clearer on this statement, to maybe postpone this to another time, because we're hoping to get some bids on this property, to sort of, again, I think that the people of this valley are, except the ones on maybe Facebook pages, are pretty good about figuring out ways to work together and to have discussions. I mean, they might be heated at first, but then generally you get to a point where, it's like, if you're here and I'm here, what could we do that would make both of us a little bit happy?
Right.
Right? And so that's what I'm hoping to come to is, if the HPC is here and we are here, is there somewhere in between? For Kevin, it's a little different. It's in between is, let's wait 2 years. For me, maybe in between is, okay, just designate the auditorium. It might be different for each of us, and it might be different for each council member. But as a body, we need to come to a decision, and as a body, they need to come to a decision. And so for me, I'd like to help them in that letter, if we can.
Well,
Present,
let me add, something I think is kind of an interesting point, which is, and I rarely do add interesting points I want to point out, but this time I think it's interesting. The whole question of, we all know there's a giant elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is the HPC is acting because they know that there's something afoot with this property, right? But currently there is nothing. We don't have any prospects of any particular development. So the reality is that out of the blue, the HPC and potentially the council will impose landmarking on a school. What does it mean? What is that? Like I said, I mean, it's like, what does that? Everyone seems to understand what it means if we want to develop this. Everyone seems to have some ideas of what it might mean for the guy who wants to put a hotel here versus the guy who wants to turn it into, walking, shopping area, whatever else might be out there. But what does it mean if it's just status quo? Then what? And what kind of a burden is that, and why? Why after all these years, why? If it's just still what it's been all along?
Especially because, as you pointed out, there's probably a, maybe not better than even chance, but there's a significant chance that nothing will happen.
Right.
I mean, it isn't a given that there's going to be development on this property. I mean, it is not inconceivable that we'll get a bunch of proposals, none of which will yield the cash flow that we're looking for. And so it just, it's like, that's not worth it.
Right. Now everyone, the parade moves down the street and we're left with this landmarking that does what? That
Right.
causes what new burdens?
And I just
Well,
want to
it
make the
sounds
point
like-
that all of this stuff is confusing and compelling, I mean, not compelling, but confusing and important, because this is being done to an unwilling owner, right? This is why none of these questions have been answered in the past, because in the past, there's been no opposition. It's been a benefit to folks because that's why they ask for it, because typically, most people don't ask for things that hurt them, right? So if I'm asking for designations because I got a really neat property and the protection of it is going to increase its value, what we have here is an old white elephant. And protecting it is just going to continue its, flea market status. It's not necessarily, this isn't a showpiece. This isn't the church that, the lady now has. It's not the Oaks. All of those things are beautiful properties. This is not. So all of what does this mean? What is the implication moving forward? Maybe they've never been forced to articulate that because they've never actually forced it on somebody before. So it does make it much more complicated. When you're forcing somebody to have something they don't want, you better be very specific about what it is that you're doing to those folks. And I go back, at the risk of repeating myself, you should be able to articulate a compelling basis to go against somebody's desires, not a nice to have, or it's one of many, or anything like that. Oh, I didn't mean to kill conversation.
You hear that?
How are we gonna top that?
Yeah, angels passing over.
Anything else that anybody would like to discuss? I guess,
I will say, when I was looking at my phone, I was not doing Facebook, but I was looking at 1413. It's pretty broadly written, right? I mean, Leno's bill. It basically just says, we want to encourage school districts to develop their property, and it seems like the real biting piece of the legal aspect is that you are protected by, if you want to limit the residence to teachers and district employees, which otherwise would be potentially a violation of law,
Right.
right? It would be discriminatory. So it seems like you're given that sort of clearance, but I don't know how else. But I think Bill's right. I mean, I think you could interpret it as being like, if local laws that were inconsistent with your ability to turn it into that housing, that might be an inconsistency that the law would deal with. But it's pretty broad. And as to Facebook, Shelley identified my two dogs were posted today because they robbed a liquor store. They were running wild, and Shelley totally just recognized my dog. She's like, "Those are Kevin Russ dogs." It's all
They're
good.
very distinct
She
dogs.
couldn't remember your name, but she
I
remembered the name of the dogs.
I love the dogs.
any other public comments
Oh, yeah.
from someone else? You already spoke.
My name is Driscoll Nellie.
Okay, I think the meeting can be adjourned unless you think we should officially vote. I mean, everyone has expressed it doesn't say action.
Potential action.
It's an administrative item that doesn't require action, however, we did agendize it as being potential action, so if you'd like to formally take the vote on filing an objection, we can, but this is an administrative function that we can do separate from a vote as well.
Hey, we're all here. We might as well.
If there's any question, I would move to object to an action taken by the city to landmark the property.
Is that a motion?
That's a motion.
All right, do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. None opposed.
For the reasons that Andrew will be writing about this week.
Thank you, everyone. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.